The Pickup, written by Ink in My Heart and on the Page, and read for you by Eleanor Elizabeth. Summary. Tony stepped into the compound, expected to be greeted by his kids, but instead he's met with silence. And we did finger painting, Morgan babbled happily to Peter, showing her drawing for him to see. I used all the colours. Peter could see that. He grinned at his little sister. That looks great, Morgan. This is me and you. Morgan pointed at the stick figure drawings on the paper as she spoke. And this is Mummy and Daddy and Gerald. Who's Gerald? Peter frowned at the animal-looking squiggle. He's our alpaca, Morgan beamed. We don't have an alpaca, Peter pointed out. We will if we has Daddy for one, Morgan grinned, and Peter sniggered at his little sister. Peter scanned the road again, looking for the familiar car, but once again he couldn't see it. School had let out 15 minutes ago, and like every day, Peter had swung by Morgan's classroom to pick her up and take her to the front of school, where either Pepper or Tony would be waiting for them. But neither of their cars were there. Peter had even looked out for Happy's car, the man who occasionally picked them up whenever Pepper or Tony couldn't be there, but there were no cars waiting for them. There were a few older kids hanging around the front of school, and Peter tried to push down the panic that was rising in his chest. Neither Pepper nor Tony had ever been late to picking them up before. Peter scooted a little closer to Morgan, who was still admiring her drawing. Peter hadn't lived with the Starks for very long. At the age of 6, Peter had lost both his parents in a plane crash. With no living relatives to take care of him, Peter had been put into an orphanage. It had been scary. Peter being pulled out of his school and starting a new one where he knew nobody. But Peter had put on a brave face and tried his hardest. After a year of being in the orphanage, and yet no one to adopt him, they had taken the younger kids to the park, like they often did on the weekend. Peter had been playing on his own down by the pond when he heard a splash. Peter hadn't wasted any time, eyes widening when he saw that a little girl had made the splash. He'd gone rushing into the pond, immediately getting soaked as he waded towards the girl. He slipped, going under, and gasped and sputtered as he broke the surface. He struggled to his feet, slipping as he continued towards the little girl, managing to yank her up where she gasped and spluttered for breath. Peter had tried to drag the now crying girl back to the shore, but strong arms were wrapping around him and yanking him up. He was carried out of the pond and gently placed down on the ground, soft hands cupping his face as he desperately searched for the little girl, his chest heaving as he struggled to get his breathing under control. Hey, sweetie, it's okay. She's going to be okay, a soft voice said, and Peter blinked at the pretty woman. Are you okay? Is she? Peter asked. I tried to help. You did help her, the woman said. You saved my Morgan. Thank you so much, sweetie. Peter could see a man hugging Morgan tightly as she sobbed into his shoulder, face pulled in such relief that Peter fell to the ground, landing on his bottom with a small thud. The man turned, eyes opening and looking at Peter in such a way that it made his lower lip tremble. He recognised him, of course. Peter was a huge fan of both Tony Stark and Iron Man. What's your name, sweetheart? The woman asked. Peter Parker? Peter introduced himself. I'm Pepper Stark. Morgan is my daughter. Pepper smiled at him warmly. Where are your parents, Peter? We'd like to thank them for raising such a brave boy. Peter looked down at his lap. I don't have any, and I'm not brave. Soft hands were gently pushing back his now wet curls. You are the bravest boy I've ever met, Pepper said firmly, but kindly. By then, a small crowd had formed, and Peter had been swept away by the lady who ran the orphanage before Peter could even say goodbye to Morgan, and hope that she felt better soon. A few days later, when Peter had arrived back from school, he found Pepper, Morgan, and Tony Stark waiting for him. Morgan had immediately come barreling toward him, hugging him tightly, and started babbling away. A few weeks later, and Peter was officially part of the Stark family and had become Morgan's older brother, a role he took very seriously. Petey, is Mummy and Daddy coming soon? Morgan whined. I'm hungry. Peter slipped his red and blue backpack from his shoulder and rummaged for his lunchbox. He pulled out a small packet of sultanas that he hadn't eaten and handed them to his sister. I'm sure they'll be here soon. He didn't want to voice his worries that they may not be. The older kids that had been hanging around slowly trickled away, leaving Morgan and Peter waiting on their own. Hi, Peter. Hi, Morgan. Turning at their names, Peter watched as Miss May came striding over to them, her smile warm and bright as it usually was. Hi, Miss May! Morgan beamed. Hi, Miss May. Peter greeted as Miss May crouched down behind them. What are you two up to? Miss May hummed. We're waiting for Mummy and Daddy, Morgan grinned. And I'm showing Petey my drawing that I did in art today. Miss May was the art teacher and happened to be Peter's favourite teacher. She was kind and warm, but also strong and fierce. She reminded Peter a lot of Pepper. That's great, Miss May beamed. Did your mum and dad say they were going to be a little late today? Morgan and Peter shook their heads. Well, that's okay. Why don't you come and wait with me in the office, Miss May suggested. We can give them a call and find out how much longer they will be. Peter pulled on his backpack and got to his feet, taking Morgan's hand as they followed their teacher back into the school. Peter found it strange that the school was so empty, and stuck close to Miss May as she took them to the office. Take a seat, you two, Miss May said, and I'll give your parents a call. Peter helped Morgan onto the plush-looking couch against the window before jumping on himself. He kicked his legs as he watched Miss May talk to the secretary. Can you get the Starks on the phone? Miss May was saying. Morgan and Peter are still waiting to be picked up. Mrs. Stark said this morning when she dropped them off that a Steve Rogers would be picking them up, the secretary said. I take it he hasn't arrived yet? No, Miss May said, her voice taking the tone that was usually reserved for students misbehaving in her class. Can you see if you can get either of the parents on the phone? The secretary nodded, picking up the phone and holding it to her ear. P.T. Morgan tugged on Peter's jacket, making him look to her. She was holding her leg up, lips pulled into a pout. My shoelaces come undone. I got it, he said, as he started doing up the laces on his little sister's shoes. Steve ran a hand through his hair, sighing heavily. His jaw ached where he had taken a hit, and he could feel it starting to bruise. It would be gone by tomorrow, but at the moment it was still hurting. As the compound came into view, he felt himself relaxing, ready to call it a day. I know we're exhausted, Steve said, but make sure to have a report by tomorrow done. We need to hand it in to Fury. There were a series of grumbles that met his statement, and he had to agree with them. Reports were the last thing Steve wanted to think about right now. The jet landed, and Steve disembarked with Sam, Natasha, Clint, and Wanda. Sam, Wanda, and Clint made their way to their rooms to get cleaned up, while Natasha and Steve headed to the kitchen. When they got there, Steve found Tony already there, a cup of coffee in his hands. He turned when he heard them, smirking as he nodded at them. That exhausting, huh? Tony chuckled. We could have used your help, Natasha said, pulling open the fridge and grabbing a bottle of water. The mighty Avengers need my help, Tony snorted. Where are they anyway? On the way to jail where they belong, Steve said, accepting the ice pack Nat threw his way and pressed it to his jaw. Tony's eyes narrowed, eyeing the ice pack. Who's on their way to jail? The assholes we were called out to apprehend, Natasha said, frowning at Tony. You took a call. Tony's voice went hard, and Steve frowned. We had to. They were going to destroy half the city. Please, tell me you organised someone else before you left. Tony's voice was clipped, hand curling around the coffee mug tightly. Organised? Steve trailed off, dread curling in his stomach as Tony snapped his eyes shut, inhaling sharply through his nose. My kids, Steve, Tony growled, eyes snapping open again. You were supposed to pick them up today. Steve's eyes widened. No. Oh, God. Tony, I'm so sorry. Tony was already pulling out his phone, glaring at Steve. One job, Steve. You had one job. I'm sorry, Steve pleaded. His jaw was nothing compared to the guilt and horror that was now swirling in his stomach. Before Tony had a chance to dial a number, his phone rang. Pepper's face flashing on the screen. Pep, Tony answered. I'm going to have to call you back. I already heard from the school, Pepper said. I'm on my way to pick them up now. They're okay. May is with them. Tony sighed with relief. Thank God. I'll bring them to the compound, Pepper said. Can you make sure something's ready for them to eat when they get here? They're going to be hungry. Got it. See you soon, Tony said. They hung up and Tony pocketed the phone, hand coming to scrub at his face. I am so sorry, Steve apologised again. Really, Tony, I never would have left them there on purpose. I just forgot with the mission. I get it, Tony sighed. You are very lucky they are okay, Steve, or we would be having a very different conversation right now. I know, Steve nodded. I would never forgive myself if something happened to them. Tony sighed again. You owe them a big apology, and you can start by making them something for an early dinner, their favourite. Mac and cheese coming up, Steve nodded firmly. Mummy! Morgan cried, barrelling into Pepper's legs when she stepped into the office. Hi, sweetie. Pepper scooped her daughter up, expertly balancing the little girl on her hip and kissing her cheek. Sorry I'm so late. Hi, Peter. Peter slid off the couch, holding Morgan's backpack and his own on his shoulders. Hi, he mumbled quietly. Pepper frowned, looking between the two very different moods of her children. Hey, Pepper, May greeted. Hi, May. Pepper smiled. Thank you so much for staying with them. No problem, May said. We had fun today, didn't we? Yeah! Morgan cheered loudly in her ear, while Peter simply nodded. Okay, can you say thank you to Miss May? Pepper said. Thank you, Miss May! Peter and Morgan chorused together. Have a good night. I'll see you tomorrow, May said, giving a wave. All right, let's go, little monsters, Pepper said, holding out her hand for Peter to take. When his small hand slipped into hers, Pepper led them out to the school to the car. She got them strapped in and slid behind the wheel, pulling into the afternoon traffic. While Morgan babbled happily about her day, not in the least upset about the lateness of the hour, Peter sat quietly beside her, staring out of the window. Pepper tried to get the boy to talk, but his answers were short and quiet before he was looking out the window again. By the time they got to the compound, Pepper was very worried about her son. Peter helped Morgan out of the car, the little girl racing towards the door, leaving Peter to carry her bag as well as his own. "I'll take them, sweetie," Pepper said, smoothing Peter's curls before taking the 2 bags from him. "Are you okay, sweetheart? You were quiet in the car." Okay, Mum," Peter mumbled. Pepper bit her lip, a small gasp escaping her. This was the first time that Peter had called her Mum purposefully. The other times he had been half asleep, the word accidentally slipping out. Her heart stuttered in her chest as she started ushering Peter into the building and hoping maybe Tony could get their little boy to open up. As they stepped into the compound, they could hear Morgan's giggling coming from further within, and Pepper smiled when she could smell mac and cheese cooking. She dumped the kids' bags on the couch in the living room and smiled as she watched Tony gently lower Morgan. "Hey, kiddo," Tony beamed at Peter. "How was your day?" Peter shrugged. "It was okay." Tony looked at Pepper, who could only shrug. She watched her husband frown, stepping closer to Peter and crouching down in front of him. "Hey, something wrong, kiddo?" Tony asked gently. Peter shook his head, refusing to look up from his shoes. "Peter," Pepper said gently. "Sweetheart, what's wrong? You can talk to us about anything, you know that." Peter's shoulders hitched and he swiped his arm across his face. I thought something had happened to you when you didn't come and pick us up." Tony's face dropped, and Pepper felt her heart plummet into her stomach. In an instant, Tony had pulled Peter into his arms and hugged him tightly. Peter was small for an 8-year-old, and Tony easily stood up, Peter wrapping his legs around Tony's waist and burying his face into his shoulder. Tony soothed a hand up and down his back, face pinched with heartbreak. "I'm so sorry, kiddo," he said. So sorry, but I promise Pepper and I would never leave you in Morgan." Pepper hugged Peter from behind, ducking to kiss the tip of his exposed ear. Her heart broke in her chest when she heard him sniffle, and Peter hugged Tony tighter. He must have remembered his parents never coming home and thought the same had happened to them. "It's okay, sweetheart," Pepper said. "We're all okay." "Mummy, why is Peter sad?" Morgan pouted. Pepper pulled away from Peter and Tony, bending to scoop up her daughter and held her close. Peter was a little scared, but everything's okay. "Oh." Morgan frowned, then brightened. "Gerald would make him feel better." "Who's Gerald?" Pepper asked. "He's our alpaca," Morgan beamed. "We don't have an alpaca, baby girl," Tony said, hand still rubbing up and down Peter's back. Peter pulled back, blinking at Tony wetly. "Could we have an alpaca, Dad?" Pepper knew immediately that there would be an alpaca in her future. This was the first time that Peter had asked them for anything, and the first time that Peter had called Tony Dad in the near 12 months that he had been living with them. "Sure," Tony nodded, voice choked. "We can pick one out this weekend." Pepper rolled her eyes, but chuckled as Morgan let out a cheer, relieved that her family was all okay.